Hello, so I'm Jess. Is that all right? Can people hear me in the back? It's a very picture of me. So I'm Leo's mum. I'm also Eli's mum, and I am going to talk to you a bit about pregnancy after loss. So I just wanted to share a little bit about our journey, but then I'll end with hopefully what feels a bit hopeful, with just some tips about how you can just tweak care to make sure that you're catering for the needs in a pregnancy after loss. So, I'd just first off like to introduce sort of the reason I'm here today, and that is to introduce you to my first son. So I fell pregnant with Leo in May 2015, after 3 cycles of IUI and 2 cycles of fresh IVF. His pregnancy was, as I've described, pretty textbook, and it was textbook until it wasn't. I woke up one morning 2 days after our 36-week scan to no movement. I did all the things they tell you to do. I laid on my back, I laid on my side, I had a drink, and just nothing got him going. And then I found his feet, and I pressed against them, and there was nothing. And I think that will always be the moment that I knew. So we phoned the maternity assessment unit at the John Radcliffe Hospital in Oxford, and they invited me in, and it was the first time we'd ever gone to the assessment unit throughout my whole pregnancy, but he was already gone. He was full term plus 1 day, so he was cooked, he was ready, but he died, and life in that split second just changed. I can't describe it any other way, it just changed course. So Leo Phoenix was born 3 days later, after an induction, room 16 for delivery 3 of John Radcliffe, on the 17th of January at 2:33 a.m. He weighed 6 pounds 4 3/4 ounces. He had a head full of dark hair. He will always be our first son, and he's the little boy that made us parents. As I like to describe him, and there's a few in the room that know, he's our little lion with a mighty, mighty roar. He has a really, really big story, but it's just up to us to tell it. And we went on 5 months later to have an early miscarriage at 6 weeks after a round of frozen embryo replacement. And then 4 months after that I fell pregnant again with our last frozen embryo from Leo's cycle, with an unmedicated frozen embryo replacement cycle. And it is this pregnancy I'd like to talk to you about today. So the focus of today really is for me to help you shape good, compassionate, effective care for bereaved parents. But first, I really need you to make sure you fully appreciate and understand how essential that care is in a pregnancy after loss, and in our case, stillbirth. So in order to appropriately care for families in that position, it's essential you understand the mindset, and that's a mindset of a bereaved and traumatised parent. And that need, I think, starts straight from the beginning, or even before somebody is pregnant again. It can't wait until a 12-week scan to kick in. It starts straight away, because that memory of trauma, it never really leaves, so neither does that need to be compassionately cared for, with really true understanding, not surface level stuff, really understanding it. And the need for this doesn't just relate to the woman who is pregnant, it relates to the whole family unit. They've all lived that trauma, they all have their own perspective on it, and from that they all have their own unique needs. So I would just like you to take a second, maybe jot down 2 words that for you would want most of the families you look after to describe their pregnancies. Just, your average person you might be coming in for a booking appointment, what would you want them to say about that pregnancy? I ask people that I know that have gone through pregnancy after miscarriage, stillbirth, neonatal and infant death, what 2 words they would use to describe that pregnancy. And this is what they, skip forward. This is what they shared with me. Gut-wrenching, terrifying and emotional, painfully isolating, it lasts forever, it's a constant worry, it's relentless and shit, emotionally draining, intense and lonely, heart-wrenching, an emotional roller coaster. They live with cautious optimism, the hopeful anxiety, and it was bloody horrendous. These aren't words we would normally associate with pregnancy, and it isn't what is either sold to us. It's not really welcomed socially either. You start using these words at work when you're talking about your pregnancy, and you suddenly become incredibly isolated because people back away. It is relentless and it is exhausting and it's 24/7 and there is no break and it is a mental uphill battle every single second. So the bereaved and traumatised mind is really black and white when it comes to the fragility of life. So the moment that mind starts to think that something might be wrong, your mind is telling you your baby is dead. There is really no in between, and you can't really catch yourself before you fall either. You're powerless to this mindset. It's a mindset you hate. You try to resist it. It takes control without warning and without permission. And it's this that I need you to understand. This isn't just about being anxious. This is an inability to see fact from fiction. It's an inability to recognise instinct from anxiousness. It's an inability to separate grief from trauma. It's an inability to believe you just felt them kick, no matter how hard that kick was. It's an inability to see the difference between the future and the past. You can't press play on the replay of what has happened in order to press play, can't press pause, sorry, in order to press play on the good that could happen. It's just constant. And reassurance is fragile. It's so delicate. It will break far quicker than we as parents would ever like, and far quicker than you would probably ever expect. I would say a scan or a listen-in can settle the mind for a few days at most, sometimes a few hours. So the soundtrack of loss just plays on a loop. Some days it's quieter, most days I'd say it's deafening. It filters into your dreams, it's 24/7. And the problem is, it doesn't really stop when they're born screaming either. And the mindset isn't really exclusive to the woman who is pregnant. The impact of stillbirth or loss on a partner should never, ever be forgotten. And I know we've heard a bit about that today. Whilst I experienced Leo dying inside of me and delivering him, my wife had to sit powerless and watch it unfold. She was there when we found out that he had died. She had to phone her parents to explain that their grandchild was going to be stillborn. She had to drive me home, process it all, whilst also caring for me whilst I waited for an induction. She was my birth partner, keeping me focused whilst I was high on gas and air and demanding epidurals and cracking jokes. Time didn't blur with the drugs for her. She watched him be born and held her son, whilst having to process that actually he wasn't alive, that this wasn't a mistake that she'd hoped for. She was in the bereavement suite with us. She also had to say goodbye. She had to care for me post-labour, while I ached and in pain and all the joys that post-labour does to you. She then had to take me home and we had to restart our lives. And we both lowered his coffin together. And I had 9 months off work, no questions asked. She had to go back within 6 weeks to little support. She then watched me miscarry, took me to the hospital for that, and she had to balance her own anxiety when we were pregnant yet again, without having that physical reassurance that pregnancy can give you of kicks and symptoms. She had to do this whilst trying to keep me calm in yet another panic attack or an 11 p.m. visit to the maternity assessment unit where it all went wrong the first time. And she had to again go through labour and support me whilst I was high on gas and air, powerless and anxious. And then she had to take our new son an hour after he was born to intensive care and leave me behind. So I'd just like to go back a little bit in time and explain the care pathway for Leo, just to give a bit of context when I talk about my next pregnancy. Standing at the John Radcliffe, I was placed on a high-risk pathway because of IVF. I wasn't really told why, just that sometimes there's a few blips in labour, they would like me to be continuously monitored, and they give me scans at 28, 32 and 36 weeks. They're scans that I'm really now grateful for. It allowed us to try and piece together a bit of the puzzle around Leo's death and identify risk factors for a subsequent pregnancy. And these were mainly monitoring the size of his placenta as Leo's was too small, raised Dopplers and any slowing in growth. Yet it's important to remember that parents who go through loss are not just aware of their own loss. Their eyes have been opened. My closest friends, some of whom are here today, that Leo's introduced us to have had ectopic pregnancies, missed miscarriages, recurrent miscarriage, second trimester loss, terminations for medical reasons, IUGR, stillbirth pre-labour, stillbirth during labour, neonatal death, linked to prematurity, mitochondrial disease, sepsis, SIDS, child loss. This is huge now for us. Anything and everything is a possibility. Therefore, that care needs to reflect the weight of those worries that we have. So if I come back to Eli's pregnancy, the care we received in Eli's pregnancy was a marked difference. Considering I was on a high-risk care pathway for Leo, I'm not really sure what word describes Eli's. This is the amount of contact that we had with a wide variety of departments and organisations throughout our pregnancy and postnatally as well. And I'd like to stress that actually a lot of this was our doing. I am that type of person. I organised and facilitated a lot of this, whether it was on request or in response to an incident, and organising that actually puts a lot of strain on a family. And there are many people who will not ask because they will never think that answer could be yes. So having a pathway or a team, whatever that looks like, can really help to contribute to just easing that struggle for a family. So I'll just briefly run through. So we conceived at Oxford Fertility Unit, so we had early scans there, more than I was paying for because I was already losing it. A charity local to us called Reading Lifeline offered us couples counselling throughout, and we had access to a pregnancy after loss antenatal support group, which was incredible. Obviously the usual community midwives, GPs, antenatal clinics. We were referred to a fetal medicine consultant from 16 weeks for scans every 4 weeks. I didn't self-refer, but I organised a referral through our GP to the Tommy's Rainbow Clinic up in Manchester. So we had scans 17, 23 and 35 weeks. So that was a 3.5-hour journey there and then back again for a scan that lasts half an hour. I sorted myself out with a Group B strep test because that doesn't happen. I called the Tommy's Midwife helpline in tears many a time. I utilised our bereavement midwife. That wasn't a standard process, but I needed help to be able to walk back into the maternity assessment unit. I realised I was too scared to go back in there, and I couldn't allow my fear to stop me getting help when I needed it. So she gave us a tour. I went to the maternity assessment unit many, many times. One time I came in contact with perinatal mental health, had our consultant midwife help devise a birth plan that met my needs. I went to the day assessment unit weekly and then twice weekly towards the end of my pregnancy for monitoring. We had antenatal visits with our health visitor. I was admitted at 35 weeks, probably because I went into a consultant appointment and said, I'm losing my shit. So she admitted me. I was then induced at 36 weeks. And then we had a 3-night stay on the high dependency unit for Eli, and then a further 4 nights, I think, on postnatal wards. So yeah, I'm exhausted. Now, I skip forward one second. No. So yeah, I'm exhausted looking at it, and we were working, studying and all sorts. So there's a lot of involvement to get him here safely. There wasn't a week without something. And these appointments, I think they do ease the anxiety, but anxiety doesn't fit to a schedule. So it's not even enough. And every single person either helped and at times hindered that process, depending on how effective their care was. But we had what I would describe as a core team. So between our local charity counselling and support groups, my fetal medicine consultant, who is incredible, and Tommy's Rainbow Clinic, they were able to sing a consistent message to me, and that really, really helped. And if you aren't aware of the Tommy's Rainbow Clinic, or what services you have support-wise locally, I would suggest doing a little bit of research so that you're able to refer people onwards should they need it. So these people, I think, really supported us in equal measure. They got to know all of us. They got to know me, my wife, they got to know Leo, and they got to know Eli. And it was really crucial to have that balance. They knew what we'd been through, they used Leo's name, they were confident in his history, and they understood the ways in which we have understood it. And I think that's really important. And therefore, they knew what we then needed in Eli's pregnancy. So that level of consistency was priceless in making us feel safe and secure when those two feelings are really hard to hold on to in a pregnancy after loss. And we were fortunate, my wife another military lot. They were good, I will give them that. That she was able to attend the vast majority of my appointments, and that made a huge difference. We were in this together, and that meant, you know, she was on the same page, she knew what was going on, she could be supported and cared for. And it was really, really important that she was there, because for us, each appointment posed the possibility, and some days in our mind certainty, that we were going to find out that another baby had died. So she needed to be there. I needed her. She couldn't be at work worrying about this, and I certainly couldn't be on my own. So it was just essential, and I appreciate that is not possible for everybody, but it is something that is, if it is possible, I would try and gently encourage with a family, because it is really helpful for both people. Skip forward. Skip forward. So we were really cared for as a family unit. And I think that's really important, obviously, in any pregnancy, but particularly after stillbirth or loss. And because we journeyed through it together, we knew how to also support each other through those appointments, and we knew how to communicate for each other, and she could step in when I couldn't, and vice versa. Because just going back into the hospital itself was a real challenge, so we really did need that support. And a lot of the support that I received during my pregnancy focused on my concerns regarding birth. I went in at 16 weeks demanding a C-section. I felt safer because it gave me control. I felt it reduced risk. I had timing to work towards, and I had the potential of knowing the healthcare professionals that were looking after me. They were really big, important things for me. I clearly didn't have a C-section, but worked into my birth plan were strategies to help me combat those concerns. I was able to communicate the minimal risk threshold that I had, so that was really important that somebody knew that looking after me. I was able to make sure I had continuous monitoring throughout labour. And what I couldn't control though was having a known midwife, and that was a really big factor for me. The people caring for us, you guys, give us a sense of safety, and that sense of safety is so important. And I was very anxious going into labour knowing that I wasn't going to have that. So I think it's important to know that if you are walking in to somebody's birth in a pregnancy after loss and you've never met them, they've never met you either, and they themselves are going to feel probably very vulnerable to not knowing if you get them and you get what they need in those moments, because everybody is different. And that's where a really good, well-structured birth plan can really help, so you understand where the boundaries are. Like for me, I was not going to play ball with any level of risk. That was, my threshold was down here. One thing I was really pleased that we were able to work into with our general birth plan was by understanding our sort of dual need and listening to some concerns. My consultant midwife enabled to make sure that my wife could stay with me throughout. So she was with me she could have stayed from my antenatal admission. She could have stayed in the hospital 24/7 from that point, but she had work. So at the point that Eli was born, she was then with us until we were discharged again. So we never had to battle visiting hours or anything like that. She was with me throughout my induction until we left, and this was really crucial because I found managing my emotions, I was really fearful of managing my emotions in a ward environment because we were also then in a private room. So I didn't know how I was going to cope trying to balance my emotions whilst not frightening other women that were in the wards, but also needing to be open and expressive with those caring for me and being able to verbalise my concerns that I had, and, depending on where you were, dealing with the sounds of a newborn or labour, because those sounds, even though I was about to go through it, are still really triggering. So I just feared I was going to have a panic attack on a ward, and fearing that tends to give you a panic attack. So our birth plan allowed us to, one, have that reassurance, but also that space. And that was really important. And in light of Eli's HDU admission, it was the best thing we could have had. Neither of us had to go home and leave a baby behind. Neither of us, I didn't have to be alone. And I appreciate that's not always possible, But if it is possible, I think it's really important to try and find a way to make it happen. And throughout pregnancy, we're always told, you won't be okay until you have that baby in your arms. So everybody kept telling me, you hold your baby, you'll be fine. But what happens when that baby's whisked to high dependency unit an hour after birth, and you're left alone in a delivery suite? Our team fell apart the moment Eli was born. At 10:59 p.m. on the 13th of June 2017, literally like that, our post-loss bubble just burst. We were no longer protected. Eli was born, and he needed some help with temperature and oxygen, and in hindsight, I know he was okay, and he wasn't in that much danger, but no one really took the time to explain that. And as I said, that post-loss brain is black and white. So my wife went with him, and I was left. She had to go with him, because I was convinced he was going to die, and whilst I was left, I was convinced that he was probably already dead, if not dying. There was no two ways about it, as far as I was concerned. As soon as anything started on towards happening, that was it. That meant I was left. I had to go across the corridor to shower on my own, and I was convinced that then I was going to die in the shower on my own. Get dressed, pack up my stuff, and then buzz for somebody to come back and look after me and take me to my son. They left me just at the doors of the ward. By this time, we were probably about midnight. It's pretty dark. It's pretty empty of staff, and I had to search for my son, that I thought was probably dead, and my wife. I don't really think that's an appropriate way to care for any woman, let alone someone who has already buried a child. I was petrified, and I would say that was more traumatic than giving birth to Leo in the first place. And hours after birth, I sat next to him. I was so desperate to name him, because I refused to name another child upon their death. So I had an urgency to name him, because I needed to get there first. And I didn't want to leave him, I didn't want to go back up to the ward, and I knew eventually we had no choice. It was probably like 5 a.m. at this point. So I was exhausted, I'd just given birth. I allowed us to sleep for an hour. I was kind, and then we went back down. And thankfully he did brilliantly, there was no major concerns, and he was discharged within 3 days up to the ward with us. He just had a bit of jaundice. But our team had gone. There was no one that understood us anymore. We were just on a postnatal ward. Yes, in a private room, and that was wonderful, and I'm always grateful for it, but no one understood how fragile we were. No one understood the impact that Leo's death had. I don't think anyone really even knew his name anymore. So that contrast was stark. So it's me, my wife, Leo and Eli, and we've journeyed through a lot of department waiting rooms and staff at the John Radcliffe in Oxford. It is far from my favourite place in the world, but it's taught me a lot about the power of good, compassionate and well-considered care. It's taught me a lot about how those around you hold the power of making you feel safe when it feels impossible to ever feel safe. But I'd like to move on and spend some time thinking about the bigger picture. It's not just my story, but there are things that you can do to support families, because there will be so many families going through this. I don't think you can ever make pregnancy... Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I don't think you can ever make pregnancy after loss easy. That isn't the aim. You can make it easier. You just need to take some time, some simple consideration, some adaptations, the things you already do. It's not rocket science. It really isn't. So, we've heard this one, and I cannot reiterate enough. Oh, sorry. That's us. Read the notes. Literally, none of us can say this enough. One of the biggest frustrations a bereaved parent will face in a hospital is having to repeat our story over and over and over and over again. So offer a sticker, whatever it is that you have in your hospital. If you come across somebody that doesn't have it, offer it. There's SANS ones, there's Kids Count ones, hospitals have their own, whatever. And then look for them. I hear so often that people have had stickers on their notes and they have still had to explain their story. And if you can, have a quick look. If you can, have an even longer look at the history prior to an appointment. There is so much anxiety building up to those appointments, feeling concerned about who you're going to see, whether you know them and whether they know your history, and whether you're going to have to relive those details. So taking that anxiety away from someone is a real gift. Say their name. And this is something a lot of bereaved parents will say quite a lot. Leo is not the stillborn. He is not my stillbirth. He is not my previous situation or a miscarriage or my history. He is my son. If you know their child's name, use it. If you don't, ask kindly what their name is and if you can use it. To know that people respected my son's life enough to refer him as just that, my son, Leo, meant the world and put me at great ease in that situation. And on the flip side, don't continue the taboo. Don't be afraid of loss and grief. Sadly, this is a huge part of your jobs. I remember quite clearly phoning the maternity assessment unit in Eli's pregnancy and explaining my history. I'm quite like that, I'm very quick to get it in. And I'd just say, concerned about reduced movement, I have a previous history of full-term stillbirth. I needed them to understand straight away what they were dealing with, so we could just crack on and do what we needed to do. But often I'd been met with discomfort around the word, confusion as to whether that actually meant I'd had a previous pregnancy, just fumbling over the words, not sure how to fill in the little form that you have to fill in. When I attended the Rainbow Clinic up in Manchester, it really highlighted the difference. Being scanned by someone who can at the same time quite easily discuss stillbirth with you is quite enlightening. It's really disheartening to know that even those that work in maternity services can't use the words or discuss the topic. If you can't, what hope do we have for the rest of society? Now, appointment and scan anxiety is a real thing. So knowing an appointment is coming can be really helpful, but equally there's a lot of anxiety around that appointment. So I would say, if possible, try and schedule it in the morning, so you're not sat around waiting all day, getting anxious. And consider your waiting room environment, have a look around. So we often had people sort of take us out to the antenatal waiting rooms and put us in side rooms so that we didn't have to sit next to excited pregnancy bumps. Pregnancy bumps still now make me run cold. So you're immersed in a situation that is not an environment you want to be in. See if you can find a way to help. And offer to listen to a heartbeat straight away. If in a scan environment, ask if the parent would like the screens visible or not, because for some people that's a comfort, for others that's quite difficult to go through. But still, that heartbeat needs to be found straight away, and as soon as it's found, you need to say it out loud. There's a heartbeat. It's good, it's strong, there's their heartbeat. Because you're just waiting to hear there is no heartbeat, so you need to be told otherwise. Conversation can wait. You can't have a good conversation about your care if you're anxious about whether your baby is alive or not. You will not be in that conversation. So it's so important to just get to the heartbeat. And for the first listen-ins, obviously that's really a delicate situation because you don't know whether you're going to be able to find that heartbeat. So I think it's important to explain and give control over to that family so they know what the situation is and they know what the process is going to be if you can't find it. I remember my midwife explaining to me that the next steps would be, and that gave me control to know whether I wanted her to try or not. And then if you can't find a heartbeat, it allows you to just have that little bit of balance in terms of what then happens and understanding that this may not be as serious as I'm thinking it is, because she's already told me this is what's going to happen. And find out about the support in your area. There's so many options available, but they're so rarely known about. So learn from other families that you might care for, learn from colleagues, see what's available. It might be charities, it might be peer support groups. You might have options with consultant referrals, you might have bereavement midwife support in your hospital, whatever it is, do some research and find it out, because when you go to a booking appointment, or any appointment, it's really reassuring to be told, I know this is going to be quite challenging, but there's X, Y, and Z that's going to be able to help you. Maybe I've made links already with them on your behalf. When people have to go away because they have no idea what support there is, that can feel really isolating. And be flexible. Please lose the rigidity in your mind about an appointment timeline. Offer more and when, if possible, and if you're able to do home visits, do it. Take all those environmental triggers away. And if a family wants to discuss a birth plan at a booking appointment, just please let them. For many reasons, we're not going to fit the mould, and anxiety will go in peaks and troughs at different times, so we need that flexibility. I took a long time to process my birth plan. I needed to go away, I needed to talk to my counsellor, I needed to mull it over, I needed to come back with more questions. If I waited till 30 plus weeks, I would have only started having those conversations 6 weeks before Eli was born. It just wouldn't have been long enough time to feel safe and prepared. And consider the environment. Discuss with the family if there's perhaps areas that are particularly triggering for them. So it might be the doctor's surgery, the hospital, where they had the bad news before. Could be anything. And see if there's anything you can accommodate to change that or make it a little bit more comfortable for them. I mentioned before that my bereavement midwife took me for a tour around the maternity assessment unit, and I met the manager there, and that was so helpful because I was able to be calm and considered. I was able to look around. She was able to explain what she needed me to say on the phone to get invited in quite quickly. She was able to, take me into a room and go through scenarios, and I'd been through those doors again. So when I had to go in, I knew I'd already done it once. And empowerment. I think one of the biggest challenges when you're going through that is determining what you need and then asking for it. And we're really, really vulnerable. And it's really important to keep those lines of communication open, as it always is, so that people feel empowered and able to ask for help. We often think the answer is going to be no, so we won't ask. Or, I think, in pregnancy after loss, you can't quite work out what's wrong, so you don't know what to even ask for. So it's really important to help families unravel the puzzle, and it might be just giving them time in appointments to share their emotions and concerns, or maybe encouraging them to keep a sort of a journal in between to jot notes of questions that they had or concerns that had come up, so that it can really get the benefit out of those appointments. I know we've touched on the Saving Babies Lives Care Bundle, and I hope everybody knows of it, but I suppose if you haven't, then prioritise it. So we've got 4 key elements of the bundle: smoking, fetal growth restriction, raising awareness of reduced fetal movements, and then effective fetal monitoring during labour. So these are really, really poignant. As we heard earlier, your risk of stillbirth is higher if you've had a previous stillbirth. So we really need to be on the things that help to reduce stillbirths. And on one point, in terms of raising awareness around fetal movement, I just want to share some things about that from a parent's perspective, if I can. So monitoring movement in a pregnancy after loss is both reassuring and anxiety-inducing at the same time. So I place a lot of responsibility on myself and the monitoring from the moment I first felt flutters. It was now only me and up to me to keep this baby safe and hopefully get there in time if I needed to. And I know guidance will say that there's no reliable pattern until later in pregnancy, but as soon as you feel movements, you then also feel no movement. So that it was perceived reduced movement. It's not, I appreciate that in terms of the guidance, but for me, I then needed to seek help. I needed to understand, I needed to do something and respond to those ins and outs of movements at that sort of middle stage of pregnancy. One way that I found helpful was to read and read and read the guidance about that time and really understand it in my mind. So it can be really helpful to reiterate for families what the expectations are at the different stages in movements during pregnancy, and then clearly explain when they need to act. Your memory is awful, so it's just really important to just try and really have that confirmed in your mind that I don't necessarily need to act now, or I do need to act now, and I need to act quickly and understand what the difference is. So I had to have it written down, as I say, to just get it right. But once a reliable pattern's expected, it came quite a steady crutch for me to monitor the movements. It did help my anxiety, but it wasn't perfect. And anxiety could often prevail over any valuable information that the movements were actually providing. So as healthcare professionals, it's important that you're incredibly clear and consistent with the information you provide in regards to movement. And I know that applies to all pregnancy, but I think particularly after loss, there is so much misguided information out there. So we, as parents, need to feel confident that we are absorbing the right message. And there's quite a lot of resources that can actually help communicate that. And one way I found particularly effective to empower me when I was anxious about movements was having an open dialogue about them. So, for example, can you please describe to me the pattern of movements that you've been having this week? That will allow women to verbalise and recognise how that baby is doing, more so than just going, felt movement today, yeah? Which is what I had a lot asked of me. Yeah, I felt movement. But that might be 1, 2, it might be less, it might be more. That doesn't tell us about the pattern of movement. It doesn't help that woman hear out loud that actually that pattern is quite normal, or that pattern is actually quite different to last week, actually, now you said it. But as I say, that message just needs to be consistent, and trust women with their own perceptions, even if it appears to be just anxiety, as a lot of things do appear to be in pregnancy after loss. If you suggest that things are okay without assessing because a woman is just anxious, then she herself is likely going to believe in the future that she is just anxious when she has reduced movement, and maybe feel less confident or empowered to go and ask for help. That sort of complacency that anxiety can then give your actual genuine symptoms. Now, there's many times I've visited the MAU, but I think whatever brings a family into an assessment unit after pregnancy, after loss, it is most likely going to be coupled with varying degrees of anxiety. It's pretty much a given. So, as I said, I think it's important to acknowledge that whether it's warranted medically, anxiety should always remain a reason to see somebody in the maternity assessment unit during a pregnancy after loss, or any pregnancy. Because when you're pregnant again, trusting your body, mind and instinct is really, really difficult. So for many of my visits, I couldn't 100% say for certain whether that was reduced movement or anxiety, but I reasoned that ultimately it shouldn't and didn't actually matter. If I was unable to confidently say at times if I was experiencing reduced movement, and I didn't know either way, then me and my baby needed to be assessed regardless. And equally, anxiety needs support. Often the only way we're going to get that reassurance is actually going into the hospital and dealing with it. Otherwise, that anxiety is going into spiral. So what I would say is, please, if you're in an assessment unit, please lower that threshold for inviting them in for women in a pregnancy after loss. If they are phoning, most likely they need to come in. I started phoning earlier and earlier in my anxiety, so I sounded quite calm. So generally the answer I got back, well, what's your problem? You sound quite fine. But the problem is that in half an hour I'm not going to be fine because my anxiety is going to crash. I got really skilled at actually just inviting myself in. I was never just calling for advice anymore. I would be like, I'm concerned about reduced movements, I'm anxious, I've got a history of full-term stillbirth and I'm coming in, I'm just about to leave. And they're often unplanned, they're often late at night, because randomly that's how anxiety likes to work. They're really stressful going into an assessment unit, particularly if that's where you've had devastating news before. But I would phone, I would jump through some hoops to get seen, I would have a half an hour drive in, I would wait 20 minutes to be seen, then I'd be weighed, I would do a urine sample, I would have my bump measured, I would have my blood pressure taken, which obviously is high, and then I would get to find out whether my baby was alive or not. So again, I'll go back. Please just check the heartbeat and the rest can happen afterwards. These are stressful moments as it is. And if they're on a CTG, please don't chuck them off just because they've met your criteria. Please wait until you've met their own criteria. We need to leave reassured. If we're not leaving reassured, then we're just going to come back. And just saying, I'm happy the baby is fine, but feel free to stay as long as you need, and let me know when you're happy to stop monitoring. That can just be so helpful and welcoming. And consider their past history. The MAU is where I discovered that Leo had died, so I'm not really a fan of going in there. But I knew, because I'd had my tour, that I could say, I don't want to go in room 3, thank you very much. So empowering women to know that they can make that request is really important. A simple question of, are there any rooms here that you would rather avoid, can give families that opportunity to say, not that one. Because nobody needs to go back into that room and discover and wait to see whether their baby is okay. So these are really good opportunities as well to check in with a mental health point of view of how they're getting on. These visits often occur in incredibly high anxiety. So is there something you can do at this point? Is this family getting the support that they need? Has things changed? Do we need to discuss further care for them? I once had perinatal mental health come and visit me during an MAU visit. I didn't really like the 4 hours it took for them to come and see me, but it was good to know that somebody was looking out for me. And so, as I've discussed lots, pregnancy after loss is full of anxiety, and it doesn't just relate to your own circumstances of loss because your eyes are opened. So every twin sends that mind racing, and then that tends to lead us to Google. And because of this, I would always recommend in any pregnancy for families to have trusted sources of information and use them exclusively. We need consistent, up-to-date and accurate advice, and we need to know where to find it in moments of uncertainty. So for me, that relies on Tommy's, Mama Academy, Kicks Count, group of strep support, and then the NHS website. I would, as midwives, know your way around those websites. And I would encourage engaging with them, those families and others that you know that give trusted information, signing up to their newsletters and following their social media, because that way you get to know the messages that families are being given through these avenues, and then you can still remain consistent and up to date with some of the new campaigns, like the Sleep On Side campaign from Tommy's that came out last year. They also have some really useful resources for the family, but also for healthcare professionals as well. And particularly helpful in a pregnancy after loss, but again, any. So the Mama Academy Wellbeing Wallets, which if you haven't seen are outside. They're a great way for families to feel confident about the key messages and prompts to enable families to seek help when they need it. And we heard, I can't remember who now, but we heard a really good testimony of them. So I felt quite overwhelmed sometimes trying to keep all this information in my mind whilst I'm just frantic. So it's a great way to refresh yourself. I think over half of NHS trusts now supply them, but they are only £2 online. So it's not hard for people to get access to. And the Kicks Count app, and they do other products, are brilliant at helping you feel in control in monitoring movement. Having a visual way to see the pattern really helped me. And then there's lots of infographics and campaign videos that you'll find on charity websites and social media. And I would really recommend reviewing the spaces and the corridors and things that you have in the hospitals or wherever you're working and see if they can be displayed, if they aren't already. And I'd really encourage families to have access to these free resources at home. So I have them saved on my phone. It really helps to just constantly reiterate those messages. Because as I say, that trust in yourself and your judgment has generally gone. And so you need that backup. But as we know, like online, that advice varies everywhere. So it's really important as healthcare professionals that you stick to these messages that are being sort of fed out through the care bundle and sort of the NHS. And in particular, that's for movement. And please don't stray away from it. It really, really confuses and conflicts when you've already really overwhelmed. And I think for any of the when to call the midwife issues, it's really poignant. I encountered many conflicting messages and false reassurance from consultants and midwives in both Leo and Eli's pregnancy. I knew better in Eli's pregnancy, but I shouldn't have had to lose a child to access that correct information. In Eli's pregnancy, I had midwives still tell me to drink orange juice when I phoned up for reduced movement, despite them knowing my history. I find this so concerning and so irresponsible. Orange juice does not save lives. If it did, you would be prescribing it. You've just got to stick to the same message over and over and over. Encourage families to come in for assessment if they need it, in any pregnancy. No one has managed to convince me of an alternative argument yet. And sadly, these are the conversations that people are hearing. I would go in and I can hear midwives talking to families that have gone in from reduced movement saying, what if that happens again? Oh, you'll be fine, don't worry about it if it happens again because you're all right today. No. We need to be trying to send the same consistent message from everyone. And I just want to touch on postnatal. Postnatally, that support dwindles. So we lost our protection bubble the moment Eli was born, but then once we hit community midwifery, gone. You have to remember that we are still grieving. We are in utter shock because we never expected this baby to be born alive. And then we're also postnatal, and that's not fun. We need people to be gentle and supportive with us. My midwives made me my community midwife, who saw me throughout, but once we got postnatally, made me feel like such a failure overfeeding. I did everything I could to get discharged from her as quickly as possible. That then limits me to getting any support. So antenatally, what I did find helpful was already having a connection with my health visitor. She then understood our story and was able to have that conversation with us when we were of relative sound mind and not trying to deal with a newborn and grief at the same time. And there's the Connie Health Visitor Scheme, which is available in some places, which can obviously really, really help. So helping that really good handover to the community team is obviously really important. And anxiety will persist. It doesn't just end when that baby is born alive. Going home can be really, really hard. You still have those issues of trust and instinct. So you just need that gentle empowerment and support to really, really help. And again, have access to trusted resources. So encouraging use of those is really helpful. There is a lot less reliable information actually about looking after a newborn compared to actually in pregnancy. So it's harder to know where to look. And obviously you get advice from everybody when you have a new baby. So it's really hard to know who to trust. So again, I found the NHS website really helpful, just sort of going back over things, but also knowing that I could phone my community midwifery team once I had that newborn. I don't think that's talked about enough, that you can still just drop in that way. And the Lullaby Trust also have a baby check app, and actually that can be really helpful if you are anxious, to help you determine whether your baby is unwell and whether you need to seek action. Because again, that trust, that instinct, it's just blurred now. And sleep for the baby, obviously for a parent, is really important, but baby sleep can be a real time for anxiety. It's something that still concerns me, even though Eli's like nearly 18 months old. So empowering families to make the right decisions and be knowledgeable about safer sleep is really important. And we know there can be a lot of varying messages and products available that really contradict it. So just bringing the Lullaby Trust into conversation, for example, their resources are really important, just making sure that family feel confident and safe. But ultimately, what I would say is just don't be afraid of a bereaved family. We need support more than anything. Please stand beside them, nurture them, comfort them and empower them. It's really, really hard road to go through a pregnancy and parenting after loss. And like I said at the beginning, I don't think it can ever be easy, but you can make it easier. So I'm really grateful to have shared my experiences and thoughts. And if you're ever interested in hearing more from bereaved families, I run a weekly Twitter chat, which sounds bizarre now, called Baby Loss Hour, on Tuesdays at 8 o'clock on that hashtag. We have all sorts of people affected by or invested in all forms of baby loss come together and talk about different topics and connect with charities. More often have charities guest host to talk about a number of topics that you might be interested in as a healthcare professional, to learn about how you can best care for families. So please do come along. Because it's Baby Loss Awareness Week, they've been running all week, and actually this weekend might interest you in the fact that we have Will Quince, the MP that leads the APPG for baby loss, coming to talk about government policy. And tomorrow we have Mark Harder, who works with SANS and is the lead for the National Bereavement Care Pathway, coming to discuss the 9 pillars of that pathway. So it's a really just nice, relaxed way to engage with those topics. Okay, that's me. And
thank you very much.